Sounds good. I'm going to share my slides as well. And thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here, coming down from the bottom right-hand corner of the United States. Let me start by saying that we all know that Aphasia Access is an organization that was founded on the principles of life participation approach for aphasia. One of those values is at the top of this screen, that the life concerns of those affected by aphasia are at the center of all decision-making and activity. If we take that value and we add it into our research practice and activities, what we get is stakeholder-engaged research. Now, it's important to think about what's going to happen at the end of something. In fact, Dr. Simmons-Mackey earlier mentioned this paper that she wrote with Ora Kagan, beginning with the end in mind. That's not exactly their wording, but that's the way I'm rephrasing it today. We have to think about who is going to use our work. What impact is it going to make? If we don't take that into consideration, we could end up with something like this. Things that really are not as usable as we had hoped. So it's important for us to think about who is going to be affected by our work. So today in our time together, I'm going to tell you about how you can earn this really cool digital badge, why it's important, and at the end of the talk, I'm going to give you a couple of tips on maybe an easy or a first step place to start in engaging stakeholders directly into either our clinical or our research work. Before I move on, though, I do want to say that I have been a speech pathologist and a clinical researcher focused mostly on aphasia now for over 30 years. And thank you, Todd, for having mentioned Voices of Hope for Aphasia, which is a fabulous organization that I was so happy to be a part of for a while. So I am bringing a perspective of having been a clinician and a researcher in aphasia, and also having the wonderful opportunity to know people with aphasia and their families, and to know them sometimes for a very, very long time. And so I'm bringing hopefully all those perspectives together into the work I'm going to tell you about now. Well, you may be familiar with some of these terms. This is a long list of terms and approaches and concepts, and they do not all mean the same thing at all. Many of them are referring to very specific methods or processes. Some of these terms are mostly used in certain disciplines. So, for example, citizen science is a term that's usually used in biological and environmental sciences. But what all these approaches do have in common is the idea that it is important to involve those who are going to be affected by the research into the actual process of designing, planning, and conducting the research. And so this is a big umbrella that we can call stakeholder-engaged research. Well, who are stakeholders? Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't resist including a picture of someone holding a steak here, just to keep you awake a little bit. But stakeholders in this context are the people who are impacted by whatever we are doing. Of course, our first thought goes to people with aphasia and their families, friends, and primary communication partners. And then we start thinking about other therapists, other healthcare workers, including physicians. And then we can broaden our perspective and think about administrators, policymakers, disability advocates, community organizers, local governments, and even businesses. This is a long list that includes a lot of the people that Dr. Simmons-Mackey was talking about in terms of getting awareness of aphasia and sort of spreading the word. So any of these people could be our stakeholders, and they don't all have to be, but it could be a wide range of people. Now, researchers have a tendency to get very caught up into the research process, which can be quite lengthy. So any given research study starts with a knowledge gap, and then moves to developing a research question, figuring out the design, the methods, getting the ethical approval, then finally gathering up those data, and then finally get the results, analyzing the data, interpreting the data, writing it up, presenting it. And then we feel, okay, we have squeezed this out and we've finished our project. When in fact, the project is probably just beginning. That is, the impact of the project is just now going to start. Let's take an example. Let's imagine that you were going to study screening in aphasia. That is, how well or how accurately do we identify people with aphasia when they first come into the hospital? We wanted to know maybe facilitators or barriers to doing that. Well, that project certainly would affect people living with aphasia, because maybe they would know more about their aphasia starting from the very beginning, and certainly it would impact their families and friends. And it would affect other therapists, because now we would be maybe able to talk about people's aphasia earlier on while they're getting other kinds of therapy like physical therapy or occupational therapy. We would hope that it would impact other healthcare workers, even including their doctors. And then ultimately it might impact the hospital administration. So what are the work processes that are related to getting this screening completed? And how does that affect all the policies and procedures within the hospital? So the impact of that study could be very great, and there could be many stakeholders. That is to say, there could be very many people that we actually would hope would be impacted or affected by the research. So in this example, we might consider involving in some way some folks from all of these groups listed on the right hand on the side of the slide here, because they would all maybe end up being affected, and so we want their input at the very beginning when we start planning the research. Well, these stakeholders can play various roles. This is one model that shows the levels of involvement of our stakeholders. So we start down here at the very bottom of this inverted triangle, and it has the word participants. This is the level that most researchers are traditionally trained to think about, because we're used to designing and coming up with the whole idea of the study, and then whoever's involved in the study, there are participants down here. But in stakeholder-engaged research, we're going to include people from groups that are going to be impacted by our project as maybe reviewers or advisors, even up to co-researchers. Can we plan the study together or all the way at the top, the research leaders. In other words, someone else who's not a researcher has an idea for a study, and they convince or hire a researcher under their direction. So these are some roles that all these different stakeholders can play. Fairly recently, there was a review of a lot of different frameworks or approaches on this kind of stakeholder-engaged research. And we might do this kind of research because we want to make an even playing field. So we want the power dynamics to be more equitable. Maybe we want stakeholders to help us figure out what research priorities should be. What's the most important research to do? Maybe we want some advisors to help us with one particular study. Like maybe they're going to help us recruit people to the study or help make sure that information or the consent process is understandable, or perhaps they're going to help us share the results. They'll help us create an understandable summary of what we did and get it out to people in different venues. Or finally, maybe we just want to develop a partnership with a particular group. And as we all move forward together, we can address problems together because we have an ongoing partnership. These are 5 different frameworks or sort of ways to think about involving different stakeholders into research. Well, let's look back at this triangle again and the different levels of involvement. What we're interested in at the moment is helping people with aphasia become co-researchers with us. And in fact, we'd like to develop capacity of everyone to maybe ultimately help us, come up with the research ideas and tell us what research they think we should be doing. And so what I'm going to tell you about now is how we're moving towards helping us all become more co-researchers in aphasia research. I will tell you though, it is not easy to get people who have all different experiences or background or sources of knowledge to work successfully around the table. Probably most of us have had the opportunity of sitting down at a table where you have a lot of different disciplines, different experiences. It takes some work. Well, it's no different when you get clinicians and researchers and people with aphasia. Everybody is bringing a different type of knowledge or a different type of expertise to the table. So it turns out that in lots of fields where they do this kind of work, we already know that it's important to prepare and train everyone who's going to sit at that table. And it's important to prepare in advance. You're going to be decreasing your chances of success if we don't go through this preparation process. So one thing we know from other disciplines and a lot of other work in this area is that it's usually a good idea for different stakeholder groups to do some amount of preparation in advance on their own. So for example, researchers might need a certain kind of training or time to think about certain issues, and people with aphasia need something else a little bit different. So we may start separately in our training, but then we can come together prepared to work with each other. So in 2017, we were very happy to have been the recipient of a 2-year funded project from the Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institute in the United States. And what we accomplished in 2017 was the creation of training videos, one set of 3 videos that were directed or designed more for researchers and clinicians, and a different but parallel set of 3 training videos that was designed for people with aphasia and their family members and friends. You can see here on the slide the kinds of topics. So researchers and clinicians had time to think about how involving people with aphasia benefits research, what are the role expectations, and what are some tools and strategies to actually do this. People with aphasia and their family learned about what the research process is. What kinds of things can we learn from research, or what do we even know about aphasia research, and what you can expect, what you can contribute, and what questions you can ask. So these 3 video trainings are still available, and they're available on our new website, which is projectbridge.online. And certainly feel free to write that in the chat and share it, and I can post it later too, but I've got it a couple more times on these slides, so don't worry. Then the next year in 2018, we brought 102 people who had all completed the 3-step training video series together for a 2-day conference. And there were 33 people with aphasia, 25 family members, 18 clinicians, and 26 researchers from all these colored states in the United States. And at the end of those 2 days, we had created 11 research teams. On each research team were people with aphasia, family members, clinicians, and researchers. What you see on the slide is an illustration that was created by a professional visual illustrator who was drawing for us during our conference. And this was the final drawing that he made. And so he's got a picture of clinicians over here and individuals and families affected by aphasia and researchers. And we're all making a big pot of soup, but everybody is contributing something a little bit different to that soup. And on the big soup pot, he wrote the research topics of our 11 teams that were generated in that conference in the fall of 2018. We were very happy to receive a second PCORI Engagement Award that just began in January of this year in 2020. And so what we're doing in this year and next year is further building a research incubator network. We want to make 11 teams into 22 stakeholder-engaged research teams that are all focused on research in aphasia and communication disabilities. And we're taking what we learned in the first 2 years and building on them. We have 4 regional centers shown here on this map around the United States. And so one is in the far west, one in the Midwest, the Northeast, and the Southeast. And there I am in the bottom right of the country. We have expanded our leadership team from the first advisory team that we had in the first 2 years. And I am very thankful and happy to say that we have this fabulous leadership team, many of whom have been with us since we first started planning our very first steps in 2016. And this represents a great network of folks around the country who are committed to this kind of work. Well, one thing we learned in our first 2 years is that it's important to get prepared and trained. And so we're building on the evidence base that is out there in other fields and our specific experience in aphasia in our first 2 years. And we have a little training pathway. So your first step is just to participate in those 3 training videos. And when you do that, you can get a digital badge. And you move on to the second step, which is called a learning visit. And you can get another digital badge. And finally, when you finish all that and you get connected to a research team, you can have that great digital badge I showed you at the beginning. Now, this goes across, this is for any kind of stakeholder, researcher, clinician, person with aphasia, or family member. And the reason we do that is a digital badge is an image, but it's connected to a link. So when somebody clicks your badge, they will see a list of the work you have done to accomplish that badge. And we do this to acknowledge everyone's accomplishment and to create awareness and also to create a sense of community. So if you get an email from me, you'll see my badge right at the bottom of my email, and some people are sharing them on social media or web pages. Now, we don't expect anyone to do this training alone. So we have a program where we are going to match newcomers to this process to someone who's been through it a little bit and already completed some of this. So we have guides and newcomers. And so when you start your training, you will get, if you are a person with aphasia, you'll be matched with a person with aphasia. If you are a researcher, you will be matched with another researcher. I was explaining this to someone in a different organization not long ago, and they said, so basically you're a dating service? Well, not quite, but we are doing a bit of matchmaking and making sure that everyone can co-learn and move through the process together. Well, if you're interested in getting started, or maybe you have a research team, you'd like your whole research team to maybe work through some of these processes together, you can get started by going to our homepage at projectbridge.online and clicking on the blue Get Started link. That will allow you the opportunity to sign up for training. And if you're not quite sure about that, I'll have some other options for you, actions you can take at the end. But now what I'd like to do is just suggest one concrete place for you to start. This is a really big picture of really changing our paradigm of how many of us were trained to do research. And, you know, it's not easy. You can't just hold one meeting and you're done for the most part. It's a process that definitely takes some dedication and commitment in our work in our first 2 years. And other people have found that, you know, it takes more time. It's a big investment of time at the beginning. So you need to be really clear on what you're going to do. So one place to maybe start is with an advisory council. Now, patient and family advisory councils are frequently used or created within hospitals and healthcare systems. You may already work at a place that has an advisory council. And if you do, by the way, and you haven't thought of it yet, try to get somebody with aphasia or a communication disability on that advisory council for your hospital or your clinic as a way to raise awareness and get everyone connected and understanding about communication issues. But these kinds of advisory councils are usually consultants on the clinical activities or the clinical care of a hospital. But they can also advise people on research activities or a particular research study. So it turns out that advisory councils do lots of great things. They can advertise and help recruit And I think I'm just gonna put my focus on what they can do for research, which is on the one side of the slide. But they can help improve communication between research team members and participants. They can help you identify priorities. They can maybe review and improve instructions or review your consent process and make sure it's really truly understandable, and help share and publicize results. Now, when you start with a set of advisors, you're not obligated to do all these things. You should maybe start, if it's your first foray into this, with one specific aim or one specific activity. So clearly identify a purpose for getting some advisors and be specific. And then when you're going to have your advisors, you want to take recruitment seriously. Draft a letter, maybe draft a job description or a set of roles and responsibilities. We're in the process of creating an aphasia-friendly recruitment package, which will include these kinds of tools and more, and those should be out in the next month or so. Make sure you have a regular meeting schedule planned and keep to it. Provide an opportunity for everyone to socialize away from just a straight business agenda. And plan to acknowledge everyone's time and effort. If you can give an honorarium or a gift card, that's great. But whatever it is that you can use to acknowledge everyone's contribution, make sure it's the same across every single person on your council, regardless of what stakeholder group they are coming from. Create agendas in advance. We find it helpful to make video agendas and make sure there's plenty of time for preparation. Don't be sending out the agenda the night before. Be clear about what was accomplished at each meeting. Be prompt with minutes and create video summaries of the minutes. And we have several resources and suggestions on our website. So, you are invited to continue viewing some additional resources about patient and family advisory councils on our website. Please join our community. You can sign up to start your training, or if not, sign up just to get our newsletter and to get updates. Check out our tools and resources. Let us match you to others who want to help. And if you have an event that you'd like to share that's related to stakeholder engagement, please share it with us so we can post it on our website and our social media. And if you have a story about stakeholder engaged research, we have some guidelines so you can submit your written or video blog post to share that on our website. I'd like to close with a quote from Alan Alda. Alan Alda is a famous actor who does a lot of work in how to communicate science and healthcare communication using improvisational techniques. And he says, real listening is a willingness to let the other person change you. I think that if we listen and work with others from other stakeholder groups, when we really listen, it's a willingness to change the direction of our research and how it's going, and that may be a very good thing. Please contact us and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you so much, and I wonder if I have 1 minute for any questions, Todd.
Oh, we have about a minute. Grateful as always. I love the reference to Alan Alda, not only for what he does, but I've been on the last 4 seasons of West Wing these days, the part that he was in at the end. So it's love his work. The one question, there was a lot of stuff. If we distill it down to one nugget, what's the one thing besides come get involved that you'd like folks to take away from the last half an hour?
There are other ways to do research that are empowering and that honor the values and principles of the life participation approach to aphasia. which is what aphasia access is all about.
Perfect. Thank you, Jackie. Hope you enjoy the rest of our time together.
Thank you.